a law student suddenly went silent with her family and friends, prompting them to raise the alarm. Once authorities stepped in, the investigation unfolded with shocking twists and turned straight out of a gripping crime thriller, eventually revealing one of the darkest and most disturbing cases in the nation's history. Lauren Giddings was born on April 18, 1984, in Tacoma Park, Maryland, where she was raised in a warm, supportive household alongside her caring parents and two younger sisters, with whom she shared a particularly close bond. From an early age, Lauren possessed a strong sense of faith and a genuine passion for helping others, which inspired her to pursue a career as a public defender, advocating for those unable to afford legal representation. To achieve this, she attended Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, where she thrived academically and even served as president of the school's Federalist Society chapter. She later secured an internship at a law firm in Atlanta, where she met David, and the pair began dating. They maintained their long-distance relationship after she returned to Macon, with plans to marry once she completed law school. In the summer of 2011, at age 27, Lauren graduated, but the bar exam still loomed ahead. She dedicated weeks to intense preparation, pausing only briefly to attend her younger sister's wedding in Maryland, before heading back to Georgia for a modest end-of-year gathering with classmates. Soon after, she informed loved ones that she would be isolating herself to focus fully on studying and requested they not contact her. From then on, Lauren went completely dark. Initially, her circle assumed she was simply immersed in exam prep, but days later, on June 29th, her sister, then on her honeymoon, grew deeply concerned after Lauren failed to open any of the shared photos. Sensing something was off, she contacted one of Lauren's friends, who tried calling without success as the calls went straight to voicemail. Accompanied by her boyfriend, the friend drove to Lauren's apartment in a modest student housing complex near the university. Lauren's car remained parked outside, but knocking yielded no response. Using a spare key, they entered to find the place in disarray, understandable given Lauren's upcoming move-in with David the next day, with bags and luggage strewn about. But Lauren was missing, even though her purse, phone, and laptop were all left behind. Nothing added up. Why would she vanish without her essentials or vehicle? The friend rallied others, and a group search ensued across campus and surrounding areas, revealing that no one had seen or heard from Lauren in days. Her family rushed from Maryland to join the effort, while friends continued looking through the night until, with no leads by morning, they notified the police. Officers inspected the unit and found no evidence of forced entry or a struggle. Yet the abrupt disappearance raised red flags, leading to a forensic team processing the scene. When they applied luminol, the bathroom tub lit up brightly, indicating a substantial amount of blood had been cleaned there. Fearing the worst, investigators pivoted to locating Lauren's body. Outside, an officer detected the unmistakable odor of decomposition and traced it to the complex dumpsters, lifting the lid just before a garbage truck arrived, thanks to police vehicles blocking access. A fortunate coincidence that likely saved the evidence from a landfill. They discovered a large black bag containing a woman's torso head missing, but presumed to be Lauren. They kept the grim find under wraps initially to protect the case. Friends and family later revealed Lauren had been reporting odd occurrences in her apartment for weeks. Items seemingly rearranged with no signs of intrusion despite locked doors, leaving her questioning her sanity. She also sensed being watched at times and installed a door security bar, but the unsettling events persisted. Something she had confided to her boyfriend shortly before vanishing. He tried to calm her down, suggesting it was probably just some pranksters fooling around, and that she had nothing to worry about. Police quickly looked into her boyfriend David and found that he'd been out of state during the time of the murder. There was no way he could have done it, so they ruled him out almost immediately. Meanwhile, forensic investigators combed through Lauren's apartment, looking for fingerprints or any other trace evidence. But it looked as if someone had done a meticulous cleaning job. Every surface seemed freshly wiped down with cleaning products. In hopes of finding something, they decided to remove the entire bathtub and send it to the lab for DNA testing. Not long after, medical examiners confirmed that the torso found in the dumpster was indeed Lauren's, officially turning the case into a homicide. They estimated that she'd been killed around June 26th, roughly 3 days before her friends and family started looking for her. However, the exact cause of death couldn't be determined, and there were no signs of sexual assault. Despite detectives' efforts to keep the investigation under wraps, the sudden police activity drew attention from reporters. Soon, journalists were gathering outside the apartment complex, filming news segments and spreading rumors that the police had found a body, even though officially no one had confirmed that yet. Detectives decided to question everyone living in the complex and check their apartments, just in case the killer was someone who lived right next door. All of the residents, who were also Mercer law students, immediately agreed to let the police in without a warrant. All except one, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel. Stephen lived right next door to Lauren, but he flat out refused to let officers into his apartment. He told them that, as a law student, he strongly believed in protecting his privacy and that he had nothing to hide. Naturally, that raised a lot of red flags for investigators. They started looking into him and quickly learned that Stephen had actually been helping with the search for Lauren the previous day. He'd even given an interview to reporters earlier that morning. He wasn't just some random neighbor. He'd been her classmate, a fellow law student, and even served as vice president of the same student law society where Lauren was president. So yes, he knew her very well, but for some reason, he was refusing to let police see his apartment. And yet, he stayed right in the middle of everything happening around the complex, hovering near officers, chatting with other residents, and talking to journalists. During the interview, Stephen told reporters how he and a few of Lauren's friends had gone into her apartment and searched the neighborhood, trying to find her. But while talking about Lauren, he started referring to her in the past tense, even though at that point, no one yet knew for sure she was dead.
Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
Did you see her hang out with anyone at the time, anything like that?
I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I haven't seen anything. I mean, you always hear noise outside, but it's just people walking by pretty much.
And she just recently graduated from Mercer?
Yeah, she and I were both JD students. We graduated back in May.
What kind of person was she? I mean, what did you see?
I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, I mean, we don't know where she is. I mean, the only thing we can think is that maybe she went out running and someone snatched her. Because I mean, we went over. One of her friends had a key. We went inside and tried to see if there was anything amiss, but I mean, she had a door jamb that was sitting right by it, so there was no sign that anyone broke in. I mean, the door was locked when everyone got here. I mean, we just don't know where she is.
When the reporters mentioned that police might have found a body near the dumpsters, Stephen went completely silent. His face changed instantly. He froze, staring off into space, not saying a word. The journalist kept talking, asking if he was okay. And after a few seconds, Stephen quietly said he needed to sit down.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
Eventually, he resumed the interview, trying to answer questions again. Though now he was acting very dramatic.
I don't know anyone that would want to hurt her. She was as nice a person as there is.
What's going on in your mind right now? Like, what are you thinking?
Why would anyone do this?
You didn't hear anything?
No. I just heard something. Maybe I could have helped.
Okay, don't worry. Do you want to sit down for a second?
And after the reporters left, Stephen just sat there for a long time, completely still staring off into the distance. A few hours later, Stephen suddenly changed his mind and told police they could search his apartment after all. The moment detectives stepped inside, they were hit with what looked like organized chaos. Large piles of canned food, energy drinks, random junk, and a lot of weapons. But what really caught their attention came next. Hidden among his things were 2 keys. A master key that could open any door in the complex, and another one, a duplicate that fit Lauren's apartment specifically. When they confronted him, Stephen admitted that he'd broken into several neighboring units when the tenants weren't at home. And in one case, he'd stolen a box of condoms. Strangely, he added that he was a virgin, but he never explained why he took them in the first place. Detectives decided to use that confession to their advantage. They arrested him for burglary and took him down to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, officers continued searching his apartment. And that's when they found an empty hacksaw package. Considering the killer had dismembered the victim, this discovery sent an immediate chill through the room. But the deeper they looked, the worse it got. Police found 2 USB drives filled with illegal material, along with a pair of women's underwear hidden in the closet. When investigators checked his computer, they discovered that Stephen had been visiting Lauren's social media pages obsessively. At the same time, his browser history showed he'd been consuming violent and disturbing adult content sometimes while looking at Lauren's photos. And even that wasn't the end of it. Detectives found links to online forums where Stephen had been writing graphic stories about murdering and torturing women, and one of the final searches in his browser history was the trash collection schedule for their city. All of this convinced detectives beyond any doubt that Stephen was involved in Lauren's murder. To them, it was clear that he'd been obsessed with her. And since he had a key to her apartment, plus Lauren's repeated complaints about things being moved around while she was gone, the picture started to come together. Stephen had been sneaking into her home all along. Still, there was one major problem. They didn't yet have any solid evidence directly linking him to the crime. During questioning, detectives tried everything they could to get a confession, but Stephen's behavior was pretty weird. For hours, he sat motionless, answering in a barely audible voice, repeating only 3 phrases. Yes, no, and I don't know.
And you've lived next to Lauren for a long time?
Yes.
Have you ever seen her with that dress on?
No.
You have no idea where she's at?
No.
Just tell me what happened, brother.
I don't know.
The detectives grew increasingly frustrated. They pressured him, even tried the classic bluff, claiming they'd found his DNA at the crime scene and that the only thing that could help him now was to confess. But Stephen, who'd studied law himself, didn't fall for it. He stayed completely calm, emotionless, and silent.
You know what's crazy? I was talking to people that he works with and everything. They talk about how he's always expresses himself.
But he don't know.
He's very talkative. Stephen, they say you're so talkative, buddy, that you always so friendly. You stop in and say hello, and you talk. Why is it that you're acting so short with us tonight? If you have all this character and personality about you, why is it that everything that we get from you is yes, no, or I don't know?
I don't know.
Well, you sure were talking to the media tonight, weren't you?
They asked what happened.
Yeah, that's what we're asking you. What happened? What'd you tell them?
I told them
You
what
didn't-
I knew.
That you didn't know. Hmm?
Do you realize how you're talking right now? Does it not feel weird to you?
No.
Would you say that this is how you talk all the time?
I don't understand.
You're just not expressing yourself at all. Everything's with you is yes, no, I don't remember, I don't understand. You can't help me out with anything. There's nothing you can tell me to help me about this beautiful girl right here, Stephen. That was your friend. Nothing. You gonna let things go down like this?
I don't know what you want.
I want the truth, Stephen. We just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell it, so you didn't look like a monster at the end. Because you know what? I don't believe that you're a monster, Stephen. I believe that you're a good guy. You've been picked on. Girls didn't show you the respect that you deserved. You did something stupid. And I believe you feel bad about it. And that's why you're all freaked out right now. But I'm giving you the opportunity to get right. I'm giving you an opportunity to show everybody you're not a monster. That you feel bad about what happened. Your hair's there, man. Your hair is there. We got your hair with the body. How's that, Stephen?
I don't know.
Yes, you do know. Yes, you do know, Stephen. That's right, buddy. See that? Look at it. See how easy? It happens. And it happened to you. Why, Stephen?
I don't understand.
Oh, you understand? You understand exactly what I'm saying. See this stuff right here, your hair? Yeah, it fell out of your head when you was moving the body, Stephen. That's right. You remember moving the body?
No.
Yes, you do, Stephen.
Eventually, the detectives left him alone in the interrogation room, and Stephen just sat there for a long time, perfectly still staring blankly at the wall.
Just stay right here, okay?
Okay.
I appreciate all your cooperation tonight, okay?
Okay.
Officers also asked him to remove his shirt so they could check for any recent injuries. That's when they noticed several scratches across his torso, marks that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. When asked about them, Stephen simply said he had no idea where they came from. Maybe, he suggested, he'd scratched himself in his sleep. Police eventually realized there was no way they'd get a confession out of Stephen. So, they shifted their focus to finding hard evidence. They began combing through every inch of the apartment complex, and soon, they caught a break. In a maintenance room, officers discovered a hacksaw that perfectly matched the packaging found in Stephen's apartment. It had clearly been scrubbed clean, but experts still managed to find tiny fragments of human tissue on the blade, and DNA test confirmed they belonged to Lauren. From there, detectives traced the purchase of that same saw back to a local hardware store and pulled the surveillance footage from that day. On the video, clear as day, was Stephen McDaniel buying the saw himself. Investigators also interviewed the maintenance worker who had access to that room, but the man provided a solid alibi for the night of the murder. That left only one person who could have opened the door: Stephen, the man with a master key. Detectives then started digging deeper into his background and talking to people who knew him. Everyone described Stephen as quiet, withdrawn, and just strange, but also very intelligent. Several classmates mentioned that when he met new people, he would ask them two unsettling questions. What would you do in a zombie apocalypse? And how would you commit the perfect murder? Because of his odd behavior, he didn't really have any friends, and most classmates avoided him outside of school. The only person who had ever shown him any real kindness was Lauren herself. Though she found his behavior somewhat odd, she always treated him with genuine respect and warmth. Over the 3 years they lived as neighbors, Stephen had asked her out on multiple occasions, but Lauren consistently and politely declined. Outside of his studies, he led an extremely isolated life, rarely leaving his apartment with the curtains perpetually drawn and no visitors ever coming or going. In the weeks after Stephen's arrest, police continued hunting for additional evidence and scouring the surrounding areas for the rest of Lauren's remains, yet both efforts proved fruitless. The sole concrete discovery was a lab report verifying that a pair of women's underwear recovered from his apartment belonged to Lauren. Then, investigators stumbled upon something far more disturbing. On one of the memory cards taken from his home, they found a video recorded mere hours before Lauren's death. Using a long wooden pole, Stephen had attached a small camera and extended it up to her window to secretly record the interior of her apartment. This chilling footage removed any remaining doubts about his involvement. A few weeks later, he was formally charged not only with Lauren's murder, but also with 30 counts of possessing illegal material involving minors. As the case headed to trial, Stephen entered a not guilty plea while prosecutors declared they would pursue the death penalty. His defense attorney, who had previously taught both Lauren and Stephen, suggested police may have planted evidence to frame his client and argued against capital punishment by noting Lauren's own public opposition to it. The judge ultimately sided with the prosecution. The path to trial stretched on for years as prosecutors realized their largely circumstantial evidence might not guarantee a conviction, especially with the high burden required for the death penalty. After careful thought, they extended a strategic plea deal. If Stephen provided a full, detailed confession and pleaded guilty to the murder, they would drop all charges related to the illegal materials and remove the death penalty from consideration. In 2014, 3 years after the crime, Stephen accepted. In his confession, he described dressing completely in black with mask and gloves around 4:30 a.m., using a spare key to quietly enter Lauren's apartment despite her door security brace. He crept into her bedroom and watched her sleep for some time until a floor creak woke her. Startled to see the masked intruder, she ordered him to leave, but he attacked, choking her as she desperately fought back. At one point, she pulled off his mask and recognized him as Stephen. She pleaded for her life, but he continued until she stopped breathing after nearly 15 minutes. He left her body in the bathroom overnight, then returned the next evening with tools including a hacksaw to dismember her. He bagged the pieces and dumped them in various dumpsters near the university, placing the torso in the bin right by their complex. Afterward, he cut up and flushed his mask, gloves, and shirt. Stephen claimed he didn't fully understand why he did it, describing a mental blackout and even insisting he believed she was still alive, which is why he joined the search. Prosecutors rejected this explanation, pointing instead to his long-standing obsession with Lauren, evidenced by his secret window video, disturbing online activity, and fascination with violent fantasies toward women. With Lauren about to move away permanently, they believed he acted out of desperate possessiveness. His confession sealed the outcome. Stephen McDaniel received a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2041. 4 years later, he appealed while representing himself, alleging police misconduct during interrogation and ineffective assistance from his original lawyer. The court denied the appeal, as did a subsequent one in 2022. Some family members continue to claim he was framed, with his father briefly launching a fundraising page for new legal help that received no donations and was soon removed. Stephen remains incarcerated today, still fighting his conviction, though legal experts widely agree he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments, and hit the like button if you found this video compelling. Let's move on to the next case. A woman was discovered dead inside her own bedroom, and at first, investigators believed the case was already solved. The evidence seemed to point in one clear direction. But as detectives started looking deeper into her life, hidden secrets slowly began to surface. Every new detail changed the way police saw the case, and what first looked simple quickly became far more complicated. By the end of the investigation, authorities believed they had finally uncovered the truth. At least, that's what people were led to believe. Lisa Caldwell was born on May 8, 1987, in the small town of Agency, Iowa. She came from a large family, and growing up, she admired her father, who worked as a deputy sheriff for the local department. From an early age, Lisa dreamed of going into law enforcement herself. She also had a passion for bowling and became highly successful at it during high school, helping her team win the state championship 3 different times. Outside of school, she worked part-time at a local bowling alley. That was where she met a young man named Seth. His father owned the bowling alley, and over time the two became close and eventually started dating. After graduating high school, Lisa attended a nearby college where she later earned degrees in criminal justice and psychology. Throughout those years, her relationship with Seth continued to grow stronger. Then, in late 2011, after being together for 7 years, Seth proposed to her. The couple purchased land in their hometown with plans to eventually build a large house together. Until they could afford it, they lived in a trailer that Seth's parents had given them as a wedding present. At the same time, Lisa stayed focused on building a future in law enforcement. She completed an internship with the state's Criminal Investigations Division while also working at a local jail. Seth shared similar goals and wanted a career in policing as well. With help from Lisa's father, he managed to get a job in corrections at another jail to gain experience in the field. Besides that, Seth also spent time volunteering with the local fire department. So they were both moving toward the careers they'd always wanted while building a life together. A few months after the wedding, Lisa found out she was pregnant, and she and Seth were expecting a baby girl. They'd already picked her name, Zoe. By late May 2012, Lisa was 23 years old. She was 5 months pregnant, still working at the jail, and she and Seth were living in the trailer on their piece of land out in a quiet rural area. On May 26th, at around 5:30 in the morning, Seth called police and said someone had shot his wife. He was screaming and crying so hard that the dispatcher could barely make out half of what he was saying. But an ambulance and officers were sent out immediately. And because their family had close ties with law enforcement, it felt like almost everyone showed up. Paramedics found Lisa in bed bleeding heavily, and it was obvious she'd taken at least 1 gunshot wound. They tried to save her, but sadly, she died. Seth stayed outside in shock, and he told officers what had happened. He said he woke up around 4:30 a.m. and let the dog out. He also mentioned the dog was acting weird, like it sensed something, but he didn't see anything unusual. He reset his alarm for 5:00 and went back to sleep. When it went off, he let the dog back in and started getting ready for work. He went into the shower while Lisa was still asleep. About 5 minutes after he got in, he heard a loud gunshot. He ran into the bedroom, flipped on the light, and saw Lisa bleeding. He rushed over and noticed a bullet hole through the blanket and her bra. She was still conscious, but she couldn't speak. A few seconds later, Seth heard a noise coming from the living room. He grabbed his gun off the nightstand and went to check, but nobody was there. What he did see was the front door standing wide open. He ran outside onto the porch, but there was no one out there either. When Seth came back inside, he realized Lisa wasn't breathing and wasn't showing any signs of life. That's when he grabbed the phone and called 911. Among the officers who responded that morning was Lisa's father, and when the medics said she didn't make it, he immediately told his colleagues to go arrest the person responsible. Because in his mind there was already one clear suspect, the couple's neighbor, a man named Brian Tate. Brian was a veteran who'd been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He lived on the next property over with his mother, and for weeks leading up to the murder, he'd been in a conflict with Lisa and Seth that kept getting more tense by the day. It started when Seth found a dead deer lying in the road in front of their place. He dragged it into the ditch so he could get through. And then for a while, he didn't really think much of it. Not long after that, Lisa noticed a deer hide hanging from a tree on Brian's property. And later, she and Seth found that same hide sitting in a barrel on their own land. So, they tossed it back over the fence into Ryan's yard. After that, Brian kept throwing the hide back over, and Seth kept throwing it right back. Eventually, it escalated even more. Brian called the police and claimed Seth and Lisa were harassing him. He said they dumped a bucket of feces on his property and thrown rocks at his shed. What Brian didn't realize was that one of the officers who showed up was Lisa's father. During that interaction, the officer said Brian was acting off to the point where he even wondered if Brian might try to hurt his daughter. Still, he spoke with Seth and told him to stop engaging with the neighbor because Brian was unpredictable. And Seth agreed. For a while, it seemed like things had cooled down. But 12 days before the murder, Lisa found the deer hide left out in front of their house again. She told Seth, and this time, he decided to get police involved. Officers went to talk to Brian, but he kept insisting Seth and Lisa were the ones causing the whole situation. A few days after that, Seth noticed fresh tracks near the fence. Then, he saw their dog acting strangely. He started worrying Brian had poisoned the dog's outdoor water dish, so he rushed the dog to the vet. So when Lisa's father arrived at the scene that morning, he immediately connected the dots. Brian had a history of serious mental illness, and on top of that, he had military and combat experience. With everything that had been happening, Brian felt like the most obvious suspect. So just minutes after officers arrived, they headed straight to Brian's house, fully expecting it could turn into a confrontation. Police found him sitting on the porch with his mom, looking completely calm. He even offered the officers chairs and started answering their questions. Brian seemed almost too relaxed, but he said that was because of new medication his doctor had just put him on. According to him, the ongoing conflict with the neighbors had made his mental health worse. So, his doctor told him to take the pills and focus on getting more sleep. Brian claimed he'd gone to bed around 8 p.m. the night before and had only woken up recently. That meant he should have still been asleep when Lisa was shot, and his mother backed him up, saying she hadn't seen him leave the house at any point. They both also said they never heard a gunshot. Brian did confirm he owned a rifle, and he told officers that because of the conflict with Seth and Lisa, he'd been staying up at night with a gun nearby, basically standing guard outside because he was convinced they might come over and throw rocks or even feces at his place. But he added that he hadn't been doing that for about a week because doctors said his condition was getting worse. At one point, Brian said something that immediately stood out. He told them, "For a long time, I was the nice guy, and it didn't give me anything. People used me, so now I've changed how I live. I'm more serious now, not the nice guy I used to be." So Brian insisted he had nothing to do with Lisa's death, and at that moment, police still didn't have enough to arrest him. Meanwhile, crime scene texts were working the house, trying to find anything that could point to the shooter. On the front door, they found fingerprints from Seth and 3 of his friends, including one guy who actually lived with him for a while. Out front, investigators also found 2 cigarette butts. They managed to pull a partial DNA profile off of one of them, then compared it to everyone they knew had access to Lisa's home. But it didn't match anyone. As for how the killer got inside, there were no signs of forced entry. Seth told police the door might have been left unlocked after he let the dog out earlier that morning. They lived out in a quiet rural area, so they weren't constantly worried about someone just walking in. The murder weapon seemed like it had to be a hunting rifle or a shotgun, but there wasn't anything like that in the trailer. Seth gave police a full list of every gun he and Lisa owned, and nothing on it fit what they were looking for. When it came to Seth's timeline, investigators could at least confirm part of his story. There really was water in the shower, which suggested someone had used it that morning. After police spoke with Brian, they also brought Seth into the station. He agreed to answer questions. Even though he was clearly a wreck, he was crying, yelling, and blaming himself for not being able to protect Lisa. He also turned down the lawyer his parents had hired and came in anyway. Seth walked them through his timeline again, and he told detectives he was almost sure the neighbor did it. According to Seth, Brian was constantly sitting on his porch with a gun. And once that conflict started, Seth genuinely thought Brian might end up hurting him, or Lisa. While Seth was being questioned, the crime scene team was still back at the trailer. At one point, a friend of Seth's named Colton showed up. He said he was there to pick up his puppy. Seth and Lisa had been watching the dog for him. Police saw an opportunity and started talking to Colton. Somewhere in the conversation, he casually mentioned that Seth had a second phone that immediately grabbed their attention, and they pressed him for details. Eventually, Colton admitted that Seth had a mistress and that the second phone was how he kept in touch with her. Officers immediately relayed that to the lead detective, who was still sitting with Seth. After reading the messages about the affair, the detective played it carefully. He asked Seth if there had been any serious problems in the marriage and whether either of them had been seeing someone on the side. Seth said no, and that set off alarms. The detective kept going, and eventually, Seth's story started to shift. He said there actually was a woman named Rachel, and there had been something like a light flirtation, but nothing serious. According to Seth, they knew each other through work, and there was never anything physical. He claimed it was basically just talking, and that Lisa knew about it and didn't care. But at the same time, police were still speaking with Colton, and he told them Rachel had been sending Seth explicit photos. He said Seth had even shown him a few of them. And meanwhile, Seth was still telling the detective nothing like that had ever happened. To investigators, it looked like Seth was trying to hide an uncomfortable truth, and they started seriously considering whether he could have been involved in Lisa's murder. The detective tried to steer the interview in that direction, but Seth denied having anything to do with it, and eventually he decided he was done talking. So now, detectives were staring at 2 possible suspects, the husband and the neighbor. The problem was, they still didn't have any hard evidence pointing to either one, and they had to figure out where to go next. Another issue was that right after the murder, police missed some basic steps that could have made the investigation a lot easier. They didn't take gunshot residue swabs from either suspect's hands. They didn't seize their clothes for testing, and they skipped a few other standard procedures that only work if you do them immediately. By the time a full day had passed, that window was basically gone. But then, something happened that nobody expected. When officers went back to Lisa's place, which was still sealed off as a crime scene, someone suddenly spotted a shotgun in the grass. It was about 100 feet from the front door, lying right by a tree that had police tape wrapped around it, which meant officers had clearly been right in that area and somehow missed a full-sized gun sitting out in the open. Ballistics quickly confirmed this was the gun that killed Lisa. Police traced it back to a friend of Seth and Lisa's, a guy who lived with them for a while but had moved out recently. He told investigators the shotgun was his, but he hadn't picked it up yet, and it should have been inside the house. He also added one more detail. He always kept it loaded, and when the gun was examined more closely, there was another weird fact. One shell was jammed inside it. The owner said that had never happened before. His guess was that whoever fired it wasn't familiar with that model, and that's why it locked up. At that point, detectives still weren't ready to cross Brian off the list. But the weapon choice felt odd. Brian had his own gun, so if he was the killer, he'd have to go into Lisa's home already planning to grab a weapon from inside, and that didn't really make sense. And then there was Seth. Because from the very beginning, he hadn't said a single word about his friend's shotgun being in the house. The detective's next move was to talk to Rachel, the coworker Seth had been kind of involved with. Rachel confirmed there had never been anything physical between them, but her version of the relationship didn't match what Seth had been saying. She told investigators Seth had confessed he loved her and wanted to be with her. She also confirmed she'd sent him intimate photos more than once. According to Rachel, Seth constantly talked about divorcing Lisa, but whenever she pressed him on when, he dodged the question. Eventually, Rachel told him she'd started talking to another guy and was thinking about dating him. Seth's response was basically, "Give me a couple of weeks. I'll finally settle the divorce." And Rachel agreed. Then, just one day before the murder, Seth texted her and said that the very next day he and Lisa were finally splitting up and Lisa would be leaving the house. The problem was detectives couldn't find anything to back that up. Lisa hadn't told a single friend or family member she was planning to leave. Her messages with Seth didn't suggest anything like that either. If anything, the day before she died, Seth and Lisa were out together running errands, and people who saw them said they seemed totally normal. Another detail came from one of Seth's coworkers. He said that a few weeks before the murder, he'd overheard Seth arguing on the phone, and from what he could tell, it sounded like Lisa on the other end. After Seth hung up, he made a comment along the lines of, "It'd be easier if she just got in a car wreck and died." One of Seth's friends also told police Seth had talked about wanting to leave Lisa, but he didn't want to pay child support. And then there was the neighbor drama. A few of Seth's friends admitted that they'd actually been the ones throwing feces onto Brian's property and pelting his place with rocks, and they said they did it because Seth asked them to. So after learning all this, detectives started leaning towards Seth. In their view, he wanted out of the marriage and wanted to be with someone else. But two things stood in his way. First, divorce would mean child support, and second, it would blow up his relationship with Lisa's father, which could have killed his dream of a law enforcement career right there. Lisa's dad was respected in the area, and detectives believed he could have easily blocked Seth from ever getting hired or promoted anywhere local. So, prosecutors argued Seth may have come up with a plan that solved all of it in one shot. Literally, the theory was that he decided early on he'd pin everything on the neighbor, Brian, a man with serious mental health issues. And then he deliberately stoked the feud to make Brian look like the obvious suspect. He even pulled his friends into it, having them toss feces onto Brian's property and throw rocks at his place. Then they believed Seth used his friend's shotgun to kill Lisa and called 911. And because everyone already knew about the conflict with Brian, police immediately focused on the neighbor, which meant Seth didn't go through the standard steps that might have exposed him. Gunshot residue testing, clothing being taken right away, that kind of thing. In the end, Seth was arrested. About 6 weeks after the murder, he was formally charged. He pleaded not guilty, and the trial kicked off in February 2013. Friends, co-workers, and Seth's mistress all took the stand and testified against him. Seth's attorney argued that detectives had fixated on his client from the very beginning, and that they never properly investigated the person who, in his view, was the far more likely killer. Brian. Over the entire investigation, Brian was never fingerprinted, and police never took a DNA sample from him. And overall, the defense said investigators pretty quickly stopped treating him as a real possibility. A few months before trial, Brian died, which basically killed any chance of fully digging into whether he had anything to do with Lisa's murder. Still, the defense came to court with several points they believed supported Brian's guilt. First, Seth's attorney called Brian's treating doctor. The doctor testified that just a few months after Lisa's death, Brian's condition took a serious turn, and he had to be involuntarily committed. He also said Brian wasn't just dealing with paranoid schizophrenia. He'd also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Brian believed the government was plotting against him, and he genuinely feared for his own safety. And on top of all that, Brian was using weed because he thought it helped. The doctor disagreed, saying that with Brian's mental health issues, it only made him more unpredictable and more dangerous. After that, the defense called several of Brian's neighbors. One of them testified that after Lisa's death, Brian made a comment along the lines of, "If the sheriff's office did its job, none of this would have happened." The defense also pointed to a couple of items police never really followed up on. Officers had found a half-eaten sandwich and a glove on the victim's porch. Seth's attorney argued that Brian could have been watching the trailer while Seth and Lisa were asleep, waiting for the right moment, before going in and committing the murder. In the end, the jury deliberated for 4 days, but they still couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. 2 jurors insisted Seth was not guilty, so the judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial. A new trial started 2 months later, and that jury couldn't agree either. So, once again, the case ended in a mistrial. The third trial was scheduled for the summer of 2014. And right before it began, something completely unexpected surfaced. All that time, both the defense and the prosecution had been digging for anything that could strengthen their side. And in the lead up to the third trial, Seth's attorney came across something major. He got access to Lisa's messages and found a conversation with a man named Jason, a co-worker from the same jail. And based on those texts, it was clear they'd been having a secret relationship. More than that, Lisa and Jason had even talked about the possibility that she might be pregnant by him, not by her husband. The defense attorney immediately pointed out something else. Investigators had known about this affair from the very beginning. They'd seen it early on when they went through Lisa's phone, but for some reason, it never made it into the case file. The affair was essentially buried. It never came up in the first 2 trials, and Seth's attorney argued this could completely change the picture. Back then, Jason denied having anything going on with Lisa. But just days before the third trial, he finally admitted it. He said he lied because he didn't want his wife and 4 kids to find out. Now, he claimed he and Lisa met at work and started seeing each other in secret. At the time, Lisa still had more than 6 months before her wedding to Seth. But she'd already been with Seth for years. Jason admitted that they'd been sleeping together regularly, and that they had genuinely wondered if he could be the baby's father. According to him, they ended the affair a few weeks before the murder, because it was starting to damage both of their families. Seth's attorney suggested Jason could be the real killer, and that because police never truly investigated him, he might have gotten away with it all this time. Jason's wife defended him and said he was home at the time of the murder. Later, investigators confirmed that Jason was not the father of Lisa's unborn baby. They also found that his DNA did not match the sample discovered outside Lisa's home. Because of that, prosecutors were unable to convince the jury that the co-worker was responsible for the murder. This time, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Seth was found guilty of first-degree murder and also convicted for causing the death of Lisa's unborn child. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 25 years. After the trial, Seth attempted to appeal the conviction, but the court rejected it. Even today, he continues to claim that he is innocent. However, with the failed appeal and the evidence presented during the trials, there is almost no chance he will ever be released from prison. Lisa's family firmly believes Seth was the killer and says they never doubted his involvement. Even though some people still think Brian may have been responsible, the case has now been legally settled after 3 separate trials and the unsuccessful appeal. Let's move on to the next case. A woman left home for her overnight shift, but she never arrived. In the beginning, investigators barely had any evidence to go on. But as the days passed, they slowly uncovered one chilling detail after another until the full story finally revealed itself. And once it did, the case no longer felt like an ordinary missing person investigation. It felt more like something straight out of a nightmare. Morgan Fox was born on August 22, 1991, in Ohio. While she was still young, her parents separated, and she stayed with her mother alongside her 4 siblings. Years later, her mom married a man who already had 7 children of his own. Suddenly, Morgan became part of a massive blended family with 12 kids in total. And according to the people who knew them, they were all incredibly close. By the age of 21, Morgan had become a mother herself. She gave birth to a daughter, but things didn't work out with the child's father, leaving Morgan to raise her alone. In the years that followed, she worked non-stop to support her little girl, taking on different jobs and often working several shifts at the same time just to provide a stable life for her. Eventually, she got hired at a FedEx warehouse. Morgan proved herself quickly, worked her way up, and later earned a management position. That's also where she crossed paths with Jason. He was a single father too, raising a daughter by himself. The two began dating, and after a few months they decided to move in together. They rented a home in the small town of North Canton, close to Morgan's workplace, and started creating a future together as one blended family. 2 parents, 2 daughters, and a life they hoped to build side by side. On the morning of October 28, 2020, Morgan woke up early like she usually did whenever she had work. She was scheduled for a night shift, and she shared a small tradition with her mom. Every workday morning, her mom would call just to make sure Morgan was awake and hadn't missed her alarm. That day followed the same pattern. They spoke for a few minutes, exchanged their goodbyes, and Morgan told her mom she had to head out. About 5 hours later, around 6:30 a.m., a 911 call came in from Jason. He asked for both police and paramedics to be sent out. When the dispatchers asked what was going on, Jason said, "I'm pretty sure my girlfriend is dead." Jason explained that he'd woken up like usual and started getting ready for work. At that point, he wasn't working at FedEx anymore, and his shift didn't start until about 5 hours after Morgan's. But as he was getting ready, something immediately felt off. Morgan's car was still parked right outside the house, even though she should have left for her shift a long time ago. So, Jason stepped outside to check out what was going on. And that's when he saw her. Morgan was slumped in the front seat. There was a lot of blood, and she wasn't moving. Jason said he knew right away she was gone. The dispatcher asked if he tried to give her first aid, but Jason said there was no point. He couldn't find a pulse, and her body was really cold. When paramedics arrived, all they could do was officially pronounce Morgan dead. And right away, detectives started working the scene. They spotted multiple bullet holes on the passenger side of the car. And after examining Morgan's body, They determined at least one bullet had struck her in the head. Then across the street from the house, police noticed something else. In the grass on the opposite side, there were fresh, deep tire tracks. It looked like someone may have pulled up there and waited, then sped off right after the shots were fired, leaving those marks behind. But there was a problem. It had been raining overnight, so there was no real way to take clean casts of the tracks for comparison later. Detectives also knew they were fighting the clock. Whoever did this likely drove off immediately, and the crime probably happened around 2 a.m. Since then, rain had been coming down for hours. So, even if the shooter had left fingerprints or DNA on the car or anywhere nearby, there was a good chance it had already been washed away. Later, the medical examiner confirmed that Morgan died from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. But even with that, investigators still had basically nothing to work with. No clear leads, no solid physical evidence that pointed to a specific person. And to detectives, the whole situation just felt not right. Once they heard Jason's story, one question immediately jumped out. How do you not hear gunshots when your girlfriend is shot right outside your home, practically under your windows? Then there was Jason's demeanor. During questioning, he came across almost too calm for someone who had just found his girlfriend brutally murdered. And it wasn't just the interview. It was the 911 call, too. His voice stayed controlled and steady without much emotion. But one of the strangest details was what happened right there at the scene. Jason walked outside to Morgan's car without shoes. And while paramedics and police were working, he just stood there, barefoot the entire time. When officers asked him to come down to the station, he agreed, but then said he wanted to grab a pair of socks from the bedroom first. Detectives told him his home was now an active crime scene, so he couldn't go back in by himself. Still, they said he could grab the socks with an officer watching, and that's when Jason suddenly backed off. He said, "Never mind," and went to the station, still barefoot. Jason also handed over his phone, and that opened up another uncomfortable detail. In his messages with Morgan, detectives found a conversation from a few weeks earlier where the two of them had gotten into a fight. At some point during that argument, Morgan had hit him, and Jason's texts after that were intense. He wrote that he'd never forgive her for it, and that he didn't love her anymore. When detectives confronted him with that, Jason insisted the fight had only lasted a couple of days, and that they'd already made up a long time ago. And to be fair, their later messages did seem to support that. After the blow-up, the conversation goes back to normal, like nothing ever happened. So even though the whole thing felt suspicious, police still didn't have anything concrete tying Jason to the murder. But they kept digging anyway. Officers went door to door talking to neighbors, hoping someone's security camera might have caught a car, a person, anything moving through the area that night. But they came up empty. And then there was one last detail that really bothered detectives. They found out that nobody had heard gunshots, not even the closest neighbors, even the houses right nearby. That didn't make any sense because Morgan was shot right outside. Based on everything detectives had so far, they started leaning toward one main idea. This didn't feel random. Whoever did this likely had a personal reason. A robbery was basically ruled out right away, because Morgan's car still had cash and other valuables inside, including her phone. Investigators wanted to pull data from it to get a clearer picture of her life in the days leading up to her death. But there was a problem. The charging port was broken. So instead of doing a quick download, they were stuck going through the phone manually, which takes a lot more time. While they were waiting on anything useful to come back, detectives started interviewing the people closest to Morgan, trying to figure out if she had enemies or if there was anyone who might have had a reason to want her gone. And that's when they learned something that immediately stood out. Apparently, Morgan had been dealing with a long, ugly conflict at work, and it had been getting worse. According to her family, a few male co-workers had been acting completely out of line. They'd make crude comments, hit on her relentlessly, straight up offer something intimate, just non-stop disrespectful behavior. Morgan tried reporting them to HR, but nothing changed. If anything, it seemed like it backfired. After one of her complaints, Morgan ended up getting written up herself for a dress code violation, and just a few weeks before she was murdered, things crossed another line. The same co-workers allegedly grabbed Morgan's phone when she wasn't looking, unlocked it, and started going through everything. Her messages, her photos, private conversations, all of it. When Morgan found out, she was furious. She went back to HR again, but once more the guys didn't face any real consequences, so Morgan decided she was done playing nice. She planned to take it above HR, straight to higher management, and she had other women at work backing her up. They were going to file a joint complaint about what had been happening, and Morgan had already drafted the email, but she never got the chance to send it. Detectives started asking themselves a pretty unsettling question. Could those guys have killed her just to make sure that complaint never went anywhere? Because it wasn't just about losing their jobs. If Morgan escalated it, and especially if she went to police, not only over the stolen phone, but over accessing her private information, that could have meant pretty serious charges. As they dug deeper into the whole workplace situation, investigators learned something else. Morgan got her phone back from a coworker named Jason McDermott. There was actually surveillance footage that clearly showed Jason handing her the phone, so police brought him in for questioning. But Jason said the story wasn't as simple as it looked on camera. According to him, he and Morgan were actually close friends, and that day he found out a few coworkers had taken her phone. Jason said he went over, took it back from them, and noticed they were already scrolling through her gallery. He claimed they found intimate, semi-nude photos of Morgan. And here's the part that mattered. When Jason gave the phone back, Morgan realized he'd seen those pictures too. So, she was pissed. Still, Jason insisted it didn't ruin their friendship and that Morgan eventually moved on from it. Then detectives asked him what he thought about Morgan's boyfriend, whether he believed he could have been involved. Jason said he didn't buy that at all. In his words, the boyfriend genuinely loved Morgan, and Jason didn't see him as the kind of person who could do something like this. So, at this point, detectives were still basically empty-handed. They kept talking to people at Morgan's job, and more than one coworker told them the same thing. Jason was clearly into her. Moreover, according to what they'd seen, Morgan stopped talking to him after the phone incident and basically ended the friendship. That didn't match Jason's version at all. When detectives pressed him to explain what their relationship really was, Jason insisted that he loved her, but not like that. He said it was more of a deep, close friend kind of love. But the way he answered and the way he tried to frame it felt off to investigators, so they started looking at him more closely. They pulled location data from his phone, and it showed something that seemed to help him. Around the time Morgan was killed, his phone was sitting at his house, and it didn't start moving until later when he left for his early shift. He got to the FedEx facility at around 3 a.m., and coworkers said he was acting totally normal. Nothing weird, no obvious anxiety. So, detectives started to hesitate on Jason and kept digging. They brought in the two other guys who'd been involved in taking Morgan's phone. During those interviews, they learned something else. One of them also had feelings for Morgan. He'd even admitted it to her at some point, and she shut him down straight up, saying she wasn't interested. But in the end, police confirmed both men had alibis for the time of the murder. So, they had to cross them off the list, and that's where the case narrowed down again. At that point, detectives were left staring at two names: Morgan's boyfriend and Jason. While texts worked through Morgan's phone, investigators went line by line through her messages with both of them. And with her boyfriend, the text made it look like the fight from a few weeks earlier really was over, that they'd made up, and life just kept going. But the messages with Jason raised a lot more questions. He kept messaging her non-stop, trying to see her, trying to set up a one-on-one hangout for pretty much any reason. It didn't feel friendly. It felt like a crush. She just wasn't returning. And then it got even more telling. After the whole phone incident, Morgan's tone toward him shifted completely. Before she was friendly, warm, normal. After that, she barely responded at all. Jason kept sending message after message, apologizing, trying to explain himself, trying to pull her back into the conversation. But Morgan just wasn't answering. A few weeks after the phone incident, and just 4 days before Morgan was killed, she drove across the state to visit family. And while she was there, Jason suddenly texted her, "How's Columbus?" Morgan froze because here's the thing, she hadn't told anyone at work about that trip. So, she wrote back basically like, "How do you even know I'm in Columbus?" And after that, she blocked his number. As detectives started digging into Jason's background, they found even more red flags. Apparently, months earlier, another woman at work had filed a complaint about him, saying he would blow up her phone with messages, act overly pushy, and she even believed he'd been following her. But according to what police learned, nothing came of it. Then, detectives spoke to Morgan's family, and they described a few moments involving Jason that were honestly hard to listen to. One of them happened just a few days after the murder. Jason and a couple co-workers set up a memorial right outside Morgan's home without telling her family first. And when Morgan's mom showed up with her granddaughter, she was already uncomfortable with the whole thing. But it got worse fast. Jason immediately walked over, got into the car with Morgan's daughter, handed her a stuffed animal, and started going on about how beautiful she was, how he didn't want her to ever forget him, things like that. Morgan's mom was shocked. She tried to get him out of the car, but he basically ignored her until another coworker stepped in and physically pulled him away. And apparently, that wasn't the first time he'd given the family a really bad feeling. Months before the murder, Morgan threw a big birthday party for her daughter. Family and friends were there, and even a few coworkers showed up too, including Jason. During the event, Morgan's mom noticed something that stuck with her. She said Jason was acting pretty weird. He was introducing himself to people using only his first name and never explaining who he was to Morgan. And remember, Morgan's boyfriend's name was also Jason. So, her mom started wondering if this was deliberate, like he was trying to blur the lines and let people assume he was the boyfriend. And then there was the social media post. After Morgan died, Jason posted this long emotional message about how special their relationship was, how close they were, and how much she had changed his life. To Morgan's family, this didn't feel like a normal tribute from a coworker or even a friend. It felt like he was trying to own a connection Morgan clearly didn't have with him. None of this lined up with what Jason had been telling police, so detectives started seriously questioning how honest he'd been. They asked him to hand over his phone, and he agreed. First, they went through his messages, and what they found was quite telling. After the stolen phone incident, Jason had been texting pretty much everyone at work, basically begging them to help him get back on Morgan's good side. He kept complaining that she wouldn't talk to him anymore, and he was trying to recruit coworkers to act as his in-between. The detectives opened his camera roll, and that's where things got really unsettling. They found hundreds of photos and videos of Morgan pulled straight from her social media. And that alone is creepy, sure. But it didn't stop there. Mixed in with those were videos Jason had recorded himself. Most of them were at work, and it looked like he was holding his phone with the camera running, filming Morgan in secret, trying to keep it casual, like she wouldn't notice. When detectives dug even deeper, they found Jason's Skype account and realized he'd been talking to another man on there. And in those conversations, Jason was claiming he was dating Morgan, and he was sending that guy photos and videos of her as proof. After that, detectives were starting to feel like Jason was overwhelmingly the most likely person behind Morgan's murder. But even with all of this, they still didn't have the one thing they needed: hard evidence tying him to the shooting. What they did have now, though, was proof that Jason was basically obsessed with Morgan, and that completely contradicted the version of himself he tried to sell police. So, investigators went back through everything again, looking for anything they might have missed. And that's when their attention returned to those deep tire tracks across the street from Morgan's house. They were convinced those tracks belonged to the killer. But with the rain that night, they hadn't even been able to get partial casts. Still, police didn't just drop the tire track lead. They measured the marks, then compared the width and spacing to Jason's vehicle, and it matched. The tire width and the distance between the wheels lined up with his car. To be clear, that wasn't exactly a smoking gun. It was barely even a circumstantial clue, but it gave detectives a direction, and they started digging, because if someone had spun out like that in wet grass, the underside of the car should have been caked in mud. And yet Jason's car was spotless. So investigators pulled footage from local car washes. And it didn't take long before they found something interesting. On one of the cameras, they spotted Jason, and what made it stand out was the timing. It had been raining basically all day, but right after his shift ended, he still went to a car wash near his workplace. He used the automatic wash. And then when the cycle got to the wheels and undercarriage, he backed up and drove under the water stream a second time, like he really wanted to make sure the bottom of the car got rinsed off. It was highly suspicious, but still didn't prove anything. So, detectives went back to the biggest problem in the case: Jason's alibi. His phone's location data said he was at home when Morgan was killed. But detectives knew that didn't necessarily mean he was home. He could have just left his phone there on purpose to create an alibi. That's when they started pulling footage from dozens of street cameras along the routes between Jason's house and Morgan's neighborhood. They ended up watching hundreds of hours of video, and eventually, it paid off. Jason's car showed up on one of the cameras heading toward Morgan's home. And then, about 40 minutes later, it appeared again, this time driving back the other way. All of this was happening while his phone was located at his house. It was enough to finally get a warrant to search his car. Detectives brought in dogs trained to detect explosives, because that kind of training can also pick up traces of gunpowder residue. And it worked. The dogs alerted on the inside of the driver's door. That lined up perfectly with what investigators had been thinking. The shooter likely fired from inside the vehicle without ever stepping out. And that wasn't the end of it. Jason didn't own a gun, but his dad did. His father actually kept a pretty sizable collection at home. Everything from handguns to rifles. Detectives went to speak with him, and he agreed to let them look through it. In that collection, they found a revolver in the same caliber as the bullets that killed Morgan. Now, ballistic testing couldn't say with 100% certainty that this was the exact weapon used, but the match in caliber was still hard to ignore. Then Jason's parents mentioned something else, something that immediately raised eyebrows. They said Jason had stopped by their house just a few hours after the murder, and that was unusual, because he didn't visit them very often. Detectives started to wonder what if he'd taken that revolver during an earlier visit without anyone noticing, and then quietly brought it back right after the shooting. When police asked Jason why he'd gone over there, He said he was just dropping off a belated birthday gift for his mom. Only problem was her birthday had been 3 months earlier. Detectives knew they still didn't have that one single piece of evidence you can point to and say, case closed. But taken together, the picture was pretty clear to them. So, exactly 1 week after Morgan was killed, they arrested Jason, and the case headed to court. The prosecution's theory was that Jason had become obsessed with Morgan. He wanted her to be with him, but she didn't feel the same, and it sounds like in his own head, he'd been clinging to this fantasy that maybe eventually she'd come around. But after the whole phone incident, when Morgan got upset, cut all contact, and blocked his number, Jason may have finally understood that there was no fixing the relationship. According to prosecutors, that's when everything took a dark turn. They believed Jason came to the conclusion that if Morgan didn't want to be with him anymore, then she shouldn't be allowed to move on without him. So, prosecutors said he secretly took a gun from his father's collection beforehand, drove to her house late that night, and waited nearby. He already knew her schedule. He knew exactly when she'd be leaving for work, so he parked across the street and kept watch. Then, when Morgan walked outside and got into her vehicle, prosecutors said Jason drove up, fired 2 shots, and immediately headed back home. During the trial, Jason's defense attorney attempted to place suspicion on Morgan's boyfriend instead, claiming their relationship had been unstable and that he still carried anger after an earlier argument where Morgan allegedly struck him. But the defense was never able to present any convincing evidence to support that theory. In the end, the jury found Jason guilty. Before the judge announced the sentence, Morgan's family stood in court and delivered emotional victim impact statements directly to the man responsible for her death. One of the most heartbreaking came from Morgan's 8-year-old daughter. She had written the statement herself and then read it aloud while facing Jason in court. "I wish she could watch me graduate high school. I wish she could see me get married. You took all of that away from her. I used to think monsters weren't real, but you proved they are. You hurt so many people. You hurt me and everyone I care about. You destroyed your own life because of the kind of person you chose to be." In the end, Jason was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and there was nothing his legal team could do to overturn it. But Morgan's family wasn't finished seeking accountability. They later filed a lawsuit against FedEx, claiming the company failed to properly address multiple complaints made against Jason by female employees. Morgan's mother said she also blamed the company because, in her opinion, if management had taken those warnings seriously, her daughter could still be alive today. Eventually, FedEx agreed to settle the lawsuit and paid the family $4 million. Half of that money was placed into a trust fund for Morgan's daughter, so she would have financial support later in life. Let me know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Let's move on to the next case. A teenage girl finished her shift at work and then seemed to vanish into thin air. In the days that followed, the investigation spiraled into a confusing maze of dead ends. Strange tips that led nowhere, unsettling anonymous phone calls, and chilling similarities to other disappearances reported in the same region. More than once, investigators believed they were finally on the verge of solving it, but every time they got close, the case took another unexpected turn. It would take 41 years before the truth finally came into focus, and when it did, it was far from what anyone had imagined. Teresa Fusco was born on January 18, 1968, in Long Island, New York. She grew up in the small community of Lynbrook alongside her 2 siblings. After her parents divorced, her father relocated to New York City, but Teresa and her brother and sister still visited him regularly. From an early age, Teresa was passionate about dancing, especially ballet. It was much more than a pastime to her. She dreamed of building a future around it, whether that meant teaching students one day or performing on some of New York's most famous stages. By the mid-1980s, Teresa was a high school student known for her friendly personality and ability to connect with people. She quickly built a close-knit group of friends around her. At 16, she started working part-time at the snack bar inside a nearby roller skating rink. The job only took up 1 day each week and was mainly a way to earn some spending money. Most of her time was devoted to school, dance classes, and pursuing the future she had envisioned for herself. On Saturday, November 10th, 1984, Teresa arrived for work as usual at around 5:30 in the evening. She was scheduled to work late that night, spend the night at a friend's house afterward, and then travel into New York City the next day to visit her father. But almost from the moment her shift began, things started going wrong. First, she argued with her boyfriend. Later, she got into a dispute with the assistant manager at the snack bar. He criticized her for not cleaning the tables properly, and the disagreement escalated so quickly that he ended up firing her on the spot. The confrontation left Teresa in tears. Then, at approximately 10 p.m., she walked out of the rink. The following morning, Teresa's mother stepped into her bedroom and immediately noticed something unusual. The bed had been neatly made, and the suitcase Teresa had been packing the day before for her visit to her father was still sitting on the floor. Since Teresa had planned to stay overnight at a friend's house, her mother initially assumed she was still there. But when she called the friend to check, she learned something alarming. Teresa had never arrived. That's when concern quickly turned into panic. She began calling Teresa's friends one by one, and nobody had seen her. Nobody had heard from her since the day before, so she immediately went to the police. Officers spoke to Teresa's co-workers and learned she'd been fired that night. A few staff members said they saw her leave in tears at around 9:47 p.m. But after that, no one could say where she went. From the very first days of the investigation, police decided Teresa had probably just run away. Upset after getting fired and fighting with her boyfriend. Because of that, they basically didn't search for her at all. They just assumed she'd cool off and eventually come back home. Teresa's parents completely rejected that idea, and they were furious with the police for doing nothing. Her mom kept saying she and Teresa were really close, and there was no way Teresa would just walk away from her family like that. On top of that, all of Teresa's stuff was still at home, even her cash. If she'd really planned to run, she would have taken at least the basics, and she definitely would have taken her savings. Teresa's friends didn't buy the runaway story either. Once they realized police weren't seriously looking for her, they started searching on their own, walking around town, checking places she might have gone, but nothing came up. And there was another reason this felt so much darker. This wasn't even the first disappearance in their small town. Less than 5 months earlier, a 15-year-old girl named Kelly had vanished. And the similarities were honestly creepy. For one, Kelly and Teresa had been close friends since they were little, until Teresa eventually stopped talking to her because Kelly had started hanging around a rough crowd. And second, the last place Kelly was ever seen was near a gas station less than a mile from the roller rink where Teresa worked. That night, Kelly had told a friend she was going to stop by a video store before heading home. But when police later talked to employees there, they said she never came in. And just like with Teresa, Kelly's mom found that she hadn't taken anything with her, not even things you'd expect if she was running away, like her recent paycheck from her part-time job. But despite all of that, police refused to acknowledge any connection between the two cases. Just like with Teresa, they were convinced Kelly had simply run away. And in Kelly's case, that theory didn't sound quite as far-fetched. She really was a troubled teenager. But after Teresa disappeared, a lot of people started questioning the whole she ran away explanation. Teresa's family also said she'd been really shaken by Kelly's disappearance, even though they weren't close anymore by that point. For weeks after Teresa vanished, her friends and relatives kept searching. They put up flyers, called around, pushed police to take it seriously and launch a real investigation. But nothing changed. And then, it got even worse. Teresa's mom started getting calls from strangers who claimed they had tips about where her daughter was. But it quickly became clear most of them were just cruel pranks. One time she even got a call from a girl who said she was Teresa and begged for help, repeating over and over that she couldn't breathe. That went on for almost a month. But on December 5th, everything changed. Two teenagers were walking near the railroad tracks not far from the roller rink when they spotted a human body covered with leaves and wooden pallets. Not long after that, medical examiners confirmed it was Teresa and that she'd been killed by strangulation. She'd been dead for at least several weeks, which strongly suggested she was murdered the very night she disappeared. Her clothes were gone, and the autopsy found signs of sexual assault. Investigators collected biological evidence that likely belonged to the attacker, but at the same time, DNA testing wasn't available yet, so that lead couldn't take them anywhere. Now that it was undeniable Teresa hadn't run away, police finally launched a proper investigation. They questioned hundreds of men, basically anyone who knew her, and even some of her relatives. At one point, they had their first serious suspect, but they ruled him out pretty quickly. Later, when limited DNA testing became an option, investigators took samples from dozens of men, but they still didn't get a single match. And then, just a few months after Teresa's body was found, another young woman disappeared. This time, 19-year-old Jacqueline, in a nearby town just a few miles from Lynbrook. It was the third disappearance in less than a year, and people in the area started asking the obvious question: was there a serial predator operating right under their noses? But police still couldn't solve any of the cases. It went on like that for a few more months until detectives finally zeroed in on a 26-year-old man named John Restivo. When they brought him in, he admitted he'd known Kelly. And he also told them something else. At one point, he'd actually suspected two guys he knew were involved in her disappearance. Those two were 21-year-old John Kogut and 31-year-old Dennis Holstead. And once police heard that both men had previously been involved with Kelly, who was only 15 at the time, their attention immediately snapped to them. Because of the similarities between the cases, detectives started looking at Cog and Holstead as possible suspects in Teresa's murder too, and they brought both men in for questioning. Dennis insisted he had nothing to do with it, but Kogut, after a long interrogation, started changing his story, and eventually he confessed that he was directly involved in Teresa's murder. According to Kogut, that night he was riding around in a van with Dennis and Resto near the roller rink. They spotted Teresa walking along the road and offered her a ride. Once she got into the vehicle, the mood shifted. They started pressuring her to have some fun. Teresa refused and asked to let her out. That's when, according to his confession, the men attacked and assaulted her, and then killed her. After that, they drove to the railroad tracks and hid her body nearby. After getting that confession, detectives arrested Kogut and turned their focus to the other two. But they ran into a major problem. There wasn't a single piece of physical evidence tying Holstead or Restivo to the crime. Both of them kept denying everything, and they flat out rejected Kogut's version of events. But then, the case took another turn. Police got a warrant to search for Stio's van, the same van Cog said they picked Teresa up in. Inside, they found a black female hair that looked like it could have belonged to Teresa. An independent expert later said it was highly likely the hair was hers. Back then, they still couldn't run DNA testing on a hair like that. So, the expert relied on microscopic analysis, basically comparing the hair's characteristics and markers. and the results lined up closely with Teresa's. With that new piece of evidence, detectives moved forward and charged all 3 men. Still, their attorneys immediately started pointing out a long list of inconsistencies. Kogut, the one whose confession kicked this whole thing off, tried to take it back almost immediately. He said detectives basically forced him into signing a false statement. According to him, they kept him in interrogation for more than 10 hours, pressuring him non-stop, threatening him, and even getting physical, all to make him confess. His lawyer also found out that Kogut had taken 3 polygraph tests, and all 3 times the examiner didn't see signs of deception. But the lead detective told Kogut he'd failed all 3 anyway. And legally, police are allowed to do that. They can lie to a suspect to try to get a confession. They can claim they have evidence they don't actually have. Like, for example, saying someone's DNA was found at the crime scene, even if it wasn't. As for the confession itself, Katz said the detective wrote it out by hand, read it to him, and then demanded that he confirm that's what happened. Kat claimed that before landing on that final version, the detective had floated 6 different scenarios, but none of them worked to implicate Kat and the other 2 suspects. It was only on the 7th attempt, he said, that the detective finally came up with a story that fit. By that point, Kat said he was barely thinking straight, exhausted, sleep-deprived, and worn down. So, he signed the statement and then read the confession on camera. After that, detectives brought him to the spot where Teresa's body had been found, but he couldn't point out any key locations. Even so, police still moved forward with charges. And there was one more thing. Kat's girlfriend gave him an alibi for the night Teresa was taken, but investigators didn't buy it. Restivo had his own argument too. He insisted that at the time Teresa vanished, his van wasn't even drivable. He said it was sitting at his mother's house with no wheels, so there was no way he could have been cruising around town in it. His attorney even suggested the hair allegedly found during the search could have been planted by police because they were desperate to tie him to the murder and couldn't do it any other way. Despite all of that, the case against all 3 men still went to trial, and the court decided to handle them separately. In 1986, Kogut was tried first, and the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to 31 to 12 years in prison. After that, it was Dennis and Restivo's turn. They were both convicted, too, and each of them got 33 years. So, officially, Teresa's case was closed. But all 3 men kept insisting they were innocent. Their attorneys kept fighting the convictions, and that battle dragged on for years. Then, starting in 1993, when DNA testing really started to become a major tool in forensics, investigators ran the semen sample taken from Teresa's body against the DNA of all 3 men more than once. And every single time it came back with the same answer. No match, but there was more. That hair found in Restivo's van, the piece of evidence that helped tie the whole case together, turned out to have its own disturbing twist. Later testing showed that the hair had been pulled from someone who'd already been dead for at least a few hours. That didn't fit Kogg's confession at all, but it fit the defense's argument perfectly that the evidence may have been planted. Experts reached that conclusion because newer testing could detect structural changes in hair that only happen after death. Still, it took the appeals court 10 years to finally act on all of this. And it wasn't until 2003, nearly 2 decades after they'd been locked up, that their original convictions were thrown out based on the DNA evidence. Dennis and Resto were fully cleared, but Kogut was ordered to face a new trial. It happened in 2005, and this time he was found not guilty too. After that, all 3 men filed lawsuits accusing police of building fabricated cases against them. In 2006, Resto and Dennis each received $18 million. Kogg got far less, just $1.5 million, because he refused to join their joint lawsuit. So, in the end, their involvement in Teresa's murder was officially ruled out, and the case was wide open again. By that point, a new group of detectives had taken over at the local department, and they went back through everything from the beginning. Pretty quickly, they realized something frustrating. The original investigators had ignored key leads because they were so locked in on those 3 suspects. One tip stood out in particular. A man had come forward back then and told police that on the night Teresa disappeared, someone stole his car while it was parked near the roller rink. The car later turned up, abandoned somewhere else. And inside, he found a pair of women's jeans that looked a lot like the ones Teresa had been wearing. But after he reported it, police didn't really follow up, and somehow those jeans were lost. Now, 2 decades later, there was nothing anyone could do with that lead. Detectives also uploaded the killer's DNA profile from the semen sample into the FBI database, but it didn't match anyone. So, the investigation stalled again, and for years after that, there were no real breakthroughs. That's where things stayed for years until 2023, when detectives took another deep dive through the file, hoping there was still something they could use. And that's when they turned to a relatively new method that was getting a lot of attention. They still had the killer's semen sample and evidence, so they sent it to a lab that specializes in forensic genetic genealogy. The lab started searching public databases for relatives connected to that DNA profile. And eventually it led them to one family that had been living in Lynbrook back when Teresa was killed. And once detectives looked at the men in that family tree, one person fit the profile better than anyone else. A 23-year-old named Richard Bulligo. Investigators discovered that back in 1984, Richard had been living with his grandparents less than 2 miles away from the roller rink where Teresa worked. And when detectives tracked down people who remembered him and his family, several described Richard as odd, distant, and at times even unsettling. Fast forward nearly 4 decades, and Richard was still living on Long Island, roughly an hour from Lynbrook. He had settled into a quiet life, working overnight shifts at Walmart. Detectives began monitoring him discreetly, looking for an opportunity to obtain his DNA without alerting him. It didn't take long. One day, Richard threw away a smoothie cup. Investigators recovered it from the trash and sent the straw to a laboratory for testing. Once they extracted DNA from it, they compared the sample to the semen recovered from Teresa's body all those years earlier. The result was an exact match. In October 2025, 41 years after Teresa's murder, Richard was finally taken into custody. During questioning, he never directly admitted to the crime. However, he made a comment that immediately caught investigators' attention. At one point, Richard remarked, "Back then, people got away with murder." A detective quickly responded, "Things are different now, and you're not getting away with it anymore." Despite the evidence against him, Richard entered a plea of not guilty. For now, he remains behind bars awaiting trial. And given the strength of the DNA evidence, it's difficult to imagine a scenario where he simply walks free. At this stage, the biggest uncertainty is how long the legal process will take to play out. Sadly, Teresa's mother passed away in 2019 and never lived to see an arrest made in her daughter's case. Her father, however, is still alive. During a press conference, he thanked investigators for refusing to give up after all these years. In many ways, the case has finally started moving toward the ending Teresa's family waited decades to see, but one major mystery still remains. Was the man accused of killing Teresa also connected to the disappearances of Kelly and Jacqueline? Or were those entirely separate crimes committed by someone else? At the moment, authorities have not publicly revealed any evidence linking Richard to either of those cases. What they do know is that during that time period, he worked out of a mobile coffee truck, a job that allowed him to travel throughout the area and beyond without attracting much attention. That's one reason some people fear Teresa may not have been his only victim. For now, those questions remain unanswered, The trial could eventually reveal much more, but until then, everyone is left waiting to see what comes next. What do you think about this case? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's move on to the next case. A woman was discovered dead inside her own home just days before Christmas. And from the moment the investigation began, detectives found themselves facing contradiction after contradiction. The further they looked into the case, the more disturbing details and puzzling clues emerged, and eventually they did figure out what had taken place. But when the case reached its conclusion, it triggered widespread outrage and left many people with even more unanswered questions. Ellen Gregory was born on December 26, 1956, in Syracuse, New York. When she was still a young child, her father died unexpectedly, forcing Ellen to mature quickly as she helped her mother care for her younger brothers. Later on, the family relocated to the suburbs of Philadelphia. After finishing school, Ellen attended a local university where she studied retail and design. During that time, she also worked babysitting jobs to help contribute to the family's finances. Following graduation, Ellen began working as a sales manager and spent the following years building her career through several different positions. At the age of 30, she met a man named Raphael, and a few years later the two married. Raphael was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania and a respected economist. His specialty was game theory, and companies frequently hired him to help forecast consumer behavior. At times, even foreign government agencies sought out his expertise. In 1994, the couple welcomed a daughter named Olivia. From then on, they lived what appeared to be a peaceful and comfortable life in an affluent suburb outside Philadelphia. After Olivia's birth, Ellen left her career behind and focused on raising her daughter. She later became deeply involved in the local school community, including volunteering as a Girl Scouts troop leader. On December 22, 2006, only a few days before her 50th birthday, Ellen was busy preparing for Christmas. She spent the day decorating the house, wrapping gifts, and doing everything she could to create a festive atmosphere. That morning, she sent her 12-year-old daughter off to school as usual, while Raphael left for work at the university. At around 2 p.m., Raphael returned home. A short time later, he called the police. He reported finding his wife's body lying on the kitchen floor and immediately told the dispatcher that she had been murdered. When they asked why he was so sure, Raphael said she had suffered severe head trauma. When officers arrived, they found Ellen lying in a pool of blood. Just from what they could see, it looked like she'd been shot at close range. Nearby, there were boxes in torn gift wrap, which suggested the killer had caught her completely off guard, right in the middle of wrapping Christmas presents. Detectives also noticed something else, a trail of bloody footprints leading away from the body toward the garage. Based on that, they believe the killer went from the kitchen into the garage, then left the house through there. As for how the killer got inside in the first place, Raphael had mentioned something during his 911 call. The glass on one of the entry doors was broken, meaning someone could have smashed it and unlocked the door from the inside. At first glance, it looked like a burglary that had gone wrong, but almost immediately, detectives started noticing things that didn't quite fit. And the deeper they got into the case, the stranger it started to feel. The biggest problem with the robbery theory was simple. Nothing valuable was actually missing. There was cash and expensive stuff sitting out in plain sight, and none of it had been touched. Even the choice of the house didn't make much sense. Ellen's car was parked right out front, so anyone casing the place would have assumed someone was at home. Meanwhile, the house across the street had no cars outside at all, which would have been a much safer pick if this really was a random break-in. Then, there was the way the killer supposedly got inside. If someone had smashed the glass in the front door, reached in, unlocked it, and walked through, they would have had to step on broken shards. That should have left obvious signs: crushed pieces, shoe prints, Bits of glass tracked into the rooms, but investigators didn't find any of that. There was no evidence anyone had actually walked through the shattered glass, and no stray fragments showed up anywhere else in the house. After speaking with Raphael, detectives learned that the last time he'd seen Ellen alive was that morning before he left for work. He said he got back home at 1:40 p.m., came in through the garage, went upstairs, and dropped his briefcase and laptop in a room. Then, he heard their dog barking from inside their daughter's room, so he went to check, thinking maybe she'd gotten home from school early, but the room was empty. After that, he went back downstairs, used the bathroom, and only then walked into the kitchen where he found Ellen's body. Not long after, detectives found out something else that immediately stood out. For some reason, Raphael hadn't called 911. Instead, he called the local police department's non-emergency line. It was a full 10-digit number, so it wasn't something you'd usually dial in a panic. There was also no recording of that call, because unlike 911, the local station didn't record incoming calls. Detectives did speak with the officer who took Raphael's call, though, and according to him, Raphael sounded unusually calm for someone who just found his wife dead. When officers arrived at the house, he stayed quiet and controlled, almost detached. Still, investigators later learned that this wasn't completely out of character. Apparently, Raphael had a reputation for being calm in pretty much any situation and very analytical. Even so, during that conversation with police, he told them he needed medical help because his anxiety was spiking. So, he was taken to the hospital. Before that happened, detectives collected his clothing and a DNA sample, swapped his hands for possible gunshot residue, and took note of a small drop of blood on his palm. Raphael explained that part, saying he touched Ellen's body to check if she was actually dead. After he was released from the hospital, detectives questioned Raphael for the next 12 hours, and he walked them through the entire day step by step. He never asked for a lawyer and answered everything voluntarily, but when they suggested a polygraph, he refused, saying his anxiety was too high and the results could come out unreliable. As for his timeline, Raphael gave a detailed account of basically every stop. He said he left home around 9:20 a.m., swung by a fruit market, then stopped at a store to grab a soda, and headed to the university. After spending a few hours there, he said he got back home around 1:45 p.m., and that's when he found Ellen. Detectives started checking that alibi. They did find a bag of fruit on the back seat of his car, but there was no receipt to show when it had been bought. So, they went to the market and spoke to the vendor. The guy said Raphael bought fruit from there all the time, but he didn't remember seeing him that morning. The soda stop, though, did check out. Raphael showed up on surveillance footage, and while he was inside, his car even got a parking ticket, which lined up perfectly with his story. Still, detectives weren't fully convinced. When they looked around the university building where Raphael worked, they found plenty of small shops and vending machines nearby. So to them, it felt odd that he'd drive somewhere else just to buy a soda when he could have gotten one right by his office. His colleagues also backed up that he'd been at work that morning and that he left sometime close to 1 p.m. But when investigators mapped out his route, the timing didn't quite fit. By their estimate, the drive should have taken about 20 minutes less, even with traffic, and Raphael didn't have a clear explanation for the gap. And there was one more thing about his story that bothered them. Based on what he described, he was inside the house for about 20 minutes before he discovered Ellen. But when detectives broke down the steps he claimed he took, upstairs, back down, bathroom, then the kitchen, it sounded like something that should have taken half that time. While detectives were still working through all of that, the medical examiner finished the autopsy, and it brought another curveball. At first glance, everyone had assumed Ellen had been shot in the head with some kind of large caliber gun. At least the injury looked like it. But that wasn't even close to what actually happened. In reality, she'd been struck multiple times with a heavy object. What exactly? They couldn't say it. The blows were so violent that the injury to her head looked like a gunshot wound. And that's when detectives circled back to something Raphael had said on the phone. According to the officer who took the call, Raphael told him Ellen's head was smashed in, which was exactly right. So either Raphael somehow described the injury more accurately than the responding officers, or he already knew for sure how she died. On top of that, the medical examiner narrowed down the time of death to somewhere between 8:30 and 10:30 that morning, and that mattered because it meant Raphael, in theory, could have done it before leaving for work. Then, detectives started talking to Ellen's friends and family, and they learned her marriage to Raphael wasn't nearly as perfect as it looked from the outside. Ellen had told people she'd been thinking about divorce even before their daughter was born. And over the years, things had only gotten worse. Ellen had told people that Raphael tried to control basically everything she did, especially when it came to money. She said he constantly put her down and that he'd even gotten physical with her. Over the years, it only got worse. After their daughter was born, they stayed together mostly because of her. They slept in separate rooms, kept their finances separate, and talked about divorce over and over, but never actually took the final step, even as things kept spiraling. At one point, Ellen even told a friend, "If anything ever happens to me, Raphael will be involved." Family members also said that not long before the murder, Ellen had finally made up her mind to leave. She'd spoken to a divorce attorney who told her that if she got custody, she could receive around $4,000 a month in child support, and she'd also be entitled to half of Raphael's assets. Detectives learned something else too. Ellen had contacted a realtor and arranged to rent a house. They were supposed to sign the paperwork in mid-January, just a few weeks after she was killed. Raphael didn't deny their marriage had problems, but he insisted he had no idea Ellen was actually planning to divorce him and move out with her daughter. According to him, they'd talked about divorce so many times over the years that he'd stopped believing she would ever actually go through with it. To get a clearer picture of what might have been driving him, detectives also spoke to Raphael's first wife. She said he was basically obsessed with money and had controlled every dollar she spent while they were together. When investigators dug into his finances, they found he'd opened multiple accounts overseas, holding more than $2 million total. On top of that, the house was in his name. So if Ellen divorced him, Raphael stood to lose a huge chunk of his wealth. And given how fixated he seemed on money, detectives believed that could be a real motive. Their theory was that Ellen may have told him she was finally leaving, moving out in just a few weeks, and that's what set him off. Even so, detectives still didn't have anything solid tying Raphael to the murder. So, they kept digging for any real evidence, and with all that money sitting in overseas accounts, they were worried he might leave the country. So, they went to court and got an order to take his U.S. passport. But there was a catch. Raphael also had an Israeli passport, and they couldn't confiscate that. Still, he didn't try to run. As soon as the crime scene work was done, he moved right back into the house with her daughter. He even showed up at Ellen's funeral and helped carry her casket, which completely stunned her family. Pretty much all of them were convinced he was the one behind her death. So, seeing him there felt like a slap in the face. Not long after that, detectives learned Raphael had contacted a local window repair company to fix the broken glass in the front door. And that's when police came up with an idea. Instead of sending a regular repairman, they arranged for an undercover officer to go in his place. Once he was inside the house, the officer struck up a conversation with Raphael and casually mentioned he was on probation. He also made it clear he knew about Ellen's murder and claimed he dealt with the local prosecutor before. According to him, the prosecutor was the kind of guy who played hard and bent the rules to get what he wanted. So Raphael needed to be just as strategic if he didn't want to end up in prison. Then, the officer planted another idea. He said the burglar who didn't steal anything valuable story didn't really hold up, and suggested Raphael should put together a list of items that were missing from the house. The detective's logic was simple. For weeks, Raphael had insisted nothing was taken. So, if he suddenly produced a missing items list, it would look like he was making things up to support the burglary story, and that could be used against him later. But the plan didn't work. Raphael completely brushed off the suggestion, didn't offer any list, and once again, police were left empty-handed. Still, just a few days later, things shifted. Lab techs finished processing everything collected from the house, and what stood out most was what wasn't there. They found fingerprints and DNA from Raphael and Ellen, but nothing that suggested a stranger had ever been inside. No unknown prints, no unidentified DNA, nothing that backed up the idea of some mystery burglar, and combined with all the other red flags investigators had already noticed. That made Raphael look even more suspicious, because there was simply no way to prove a third person had been in that home. It wasn't a slam-dunk case against him, but prosecutors decided to move forward anyway. And in January 2007, Raphael was charged with murder. The state's theory was that he killed Ellen before leaving for work. They believed it was planned that he'd found out she was serious about divorcing him and moving out with her daughter. So, he snapped, or decided he couldn't let it happen. In their view, there were two big motives: money and custody. They argued that on the morning of the murder, he attacked Ellen while she was wrapping Christmas gifts, hitting her multiple times with some heavy object. Then, after the fact, he shattered the glass in one of the entry doors to stage it like a burglary before heading to work like nothing happened. Because the fruit vendors said he didn't see Raphael that morning, prosecutors suggested Raphael may have bought the bag of fruit earlier on purpose to help sell his timeline. That would have also given him an extra window of time to dump the murder weapon and get rid of any bloody clothing. The prosecution even brought in a psychiatrist who said the attack looked intensely emotional and that it was likely done by someone close to Ellen. The sheer brutality, they argued, pointed to personal hatred, not a random break-in. Raphael was taken into custody, and he was facing anything up to life in prison. He immediately hired a top-tier defense team, basically the best lawyers in the area, and they got to work building his case. First, they pointed out something obvious. There was no blood on Raphael's clothes, and none in his car. If the prosecution was right, if he'd beaten Ellen over the head multiple times, then some blood transfer would be almost unavoidable. But they didn't find it. Not on him, not in his vehicle, and not in his office at the university either. They also argued that investigators couldn't even find blood in the plumbing, no traces in the drains, no signs someone had washed up in the sink afterward, which is what you'd expect if the killer's hands were covered in blood. On top of that, the defense said Raphael didn't have a clear motive. There was no solid proof he even knew Ellen had real plans to leave. Raphael's explanation was basically, "We talked about divorce so many times over the years, it stopped feeling like anything more than talk." So, even if she had brought it up again, he claimed he wouldn't have taken it seriously. And about that fruit stand vendor who said he didn't see Raphael that morning, the defense had an answer for that too. They suggested the vendor may have lied just to get the detectives out of there, because having police asking questions around your stall is a great way to scare off customers. Then, there was another detail they kept coming back to: those bloody shoe prints leading from the body toward the garage. The defense said there were multiple issues with him. For one, the shoe size looked smaller than Raphael's, and when police searched the house, they didn't find any footwear with a matching tread pattern. Even stranger, Investigators couldn't match the sole pattern to anything in their database. At one point, they even suggested the shoes might not have been bought in the US at all. Maybe they came from another country, from a brand that simply wasn't sold there. The lead up to trial dragged on for almost a year, and the defense felt confident. They believed they had a real shot at winning. For prosecutors, though, it was a much tougher situation. They didn't have a single piece of direct evidence tying Raphael to the murder, which meant there was a very real chance he could walk away with an acquit. So, in the end, they made a decision: offer him a plea deal. They agreed to drop the charge down to manslaughter in exchange for a guilty plea. That charge carried 10 to 20 years, but if the person had no prior record, they could become eligible for parole in as little as 5 years. In other words, Raphael could trade a possible life sentence for something much lighter. But if he refused the deal, he also had a chance of avoiding punishment altogether. In November 2007, almost a year after Ellen was killed, Raphael took the deal and formally pleaded guilty. That was the first time he admitted he'd killed her. But he insisted it didn't happen the way prosecutors had been saying all along. Raphael said it happened during yet another argument about divorce. Except this time he claimed it wasn't about money. He said it was about custody of their daughter. According to Raphael, Ellen shoved him during the fight, and he just snapped. He grabbed a metal bar from a pull-up setup nearby and started swinging, striking her in the head over and over. Then, he said once he realized she was dead, he took off his bloody clothes and shoes, stuffed them into a bag, changed, and drove to work, getting rid of the bag and the weapons somewhere along the way. But there were still holes in his story. He didn't say a word about the broken window, and he never explained why the bloody shoe prints near the body looked like they came from a smaller shoe size. Even so, the court accepted Raphael's plea, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison with a possibility of parole after 5. Ellen's family was furious about the deal because they didn't buy Raphael's confession for a second. In their eyes, this wasn't some sudden heat-of-the-moment explosion. They believed it was planned. Raphael had always been calculating, the kind of person who thought 10 steps ahead. So his story about snapping in a rage just didn't feel believable to them. So the family filed a civil lawsuit against him. A few years later, the court hit Raphael with a $124 million judgment. It was mostly symbolic because he didn't actually have that kind of money. But it did something important. It gave them a legal path to go after his savings and assets for Ellen's daughter. Olivia had cut off all contact with him after the arrest and had been living with relatives. During the civil lawsuit, Ellen's family also introduced several details that had never really played a major role during the criminal proceedings. One of those details was a hazmat suit that investigators discovered in Raphael's trunk. That immediately caught people's attention. Ellen's relatives argued that he could have worn the suit during the attack, which might explain why there was no trace of blood on his clothing, inside his vehicle, or anywhere else investigators would normally expect to find it. There was another piece of evidence that stood out as well. In Raphael's garage, investigators found a wall rack built to hold 8 large tools. But after the murder, one of those tools was gone. Ellen's brother said he had personally helped Raphael install the rack about 5 years earlier, and according to him, the missing item was a metal crowbar. Given the injury to Ellen's head, a crowbar would have fit perfectly as a possible murder weapon. If Raphael had actually used a crowbar instead of the pull-up bar he claimed to have thrown away, it would make the entire crime appear far more deliberate. According to the family's theory, Raphael could have entered through the garage, put on protective clothing, removed the crowbar from the wall, and then gone inside the house to kill Ellen. But none of those arguments ended up affecting the criminal case. A civil court doesn't have the power to send someone to prison. Eventually, both sides agreed to a settlement. Raphael agreed to pay approximately $3 million to Olivia. Otherwise, he could have continued fighting the case through his lawyers for years. 5 years after Raphael was sentenced, he applied for early release, and the request was granted. Ellen's family was outraged that the man responsible for her death had spent only 5 years behind bars, and they launched an aggressive campaign to challenge the decision. In most cases, once a parole board makes a ruling, it's practically impossible to overturn. But this case turned out to be an exception. Only a few months after Raphael was released, authorities took him back into custody and returned him to prison to complete the rest of his sentence. He ultimately served another 5 years before the state was legally required to release him. Raphael walked free in 2017 and has remained under supervision through 2027. In total, Raphael spent 10 years in prison, but Ellen's family has always maintained that the punishment didn't come close to fitting the crime. In their eyes, he carried out a carefully planned murder and still ended up serving a relatively short sentence, even if he couldn't escape prison entirely. Ellen's brother also pushed for legal reforms, arguing that parole boards should be required to consult victims and their families before approving a prisoner's release. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like.